We've got another edition of the Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast lined up for you. I'm your podcast producer, RJ Malik. Joline, as always, good to see you.
Good to see you, RJ. Glad to be here.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to another interesting podcast with you and your guest. So why don't you introduce your guest and let us know what you're going to be talking about on this edition of your podcast.
Thanks, RJ. And Jason, welcome for everybody listening today. Jason Wild, I just need to acknowledge you are both a real advisor to my company, Bounce 10, and you're also kind of a consumer. But more importantly, right now, I was excited to talk to you today because you have just published a new book on innovation. And since I think Bounce 10 is all about innovation in families, I am particularly excited to talk today. But I wonder if you'd begin by telling us a little something about the new book. And I'd also like to hear more about your notion of the connections between your advice to us, your experience as a parent with Bounce, and the new book. It's a lot.
A lot going on for sure, Joline. Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And yeah, it really is an exciting moment for us. We're less than 2 weeks away from the recording of the podcast, from our publication of our book. And unbelievably, it's been almost 10 years in the making.
Crazy.
My co-author of The Hill. Yes, it is. It is crazy. And forever, it was kind of like, yeah, we're working on this. And at some point in the future, hopefully we'll have something to share with the world. So it really is hard to believe in many ways that it's just right around the corner. And it has been, it has been a journey. The good news, even after 10 years, we're still friends, very good friends as co-authors, which is always a plus. Our book is called Genius at Scale. How great leaders drive innovation. Really, it's a book about leaders that we believe who just lead differently. And obviously, leadership is a big topic. Innovation is also a big topic. But we kind of realized some time ago that while there's many books on innovation and many books on leadership, there was really nothing that helped provide leaders some instruction, guidance, or context around how to actually lead innovation. And I've been really, really blessed, not only because, I've been writing this book, but I've been a practitioner. So I've spent 25 years of my career around the world working on projects with a range of different organizations, big companies, also startups, in 40 countries. And you see people really literally want to pour their heart and soul and so much energy into whatever the idea was to solve some problem or change the world and make it a little bit different. And over the years, I learned so much. And one of those learnings was that we live in a world not with idea problems, but more execution problems. And as we started studying, innovation and what causes innovation to thrive, what causes innovation to stall, there were many different reasons. But the first thing that we realized was that innovation has to be led. It's a conscious decision by a group of leaders to make it happen. You can't mandate innovation. You can't dictate innovation, whether you're small or a large company. And one of the patterns that we saw was what we called the ABCs of great leadership. And this kind of represented the mindsets and behaviors of these leaders who time and time again in different industries, in different spaces, were really, really adept at creating cultures where innovation just was thriving, and was the productive result of this collaboration more than many other places. So the ABCs represent kind of distinct leadership styles: A for the architect, B for bridger, C for catalyst. And these all kind of were important at different points in whatever transformation or evolution of what the organization was going on. But when I got introduced to Bounce about a year ago, honestly, I fell in love very, very quickly as a parent, as an innovator, and as someone who's just active in my own community. And we'll get into that. But yes, kind of what does innovation mean to us? Um, I try to define it very simply. I see innovation as new ideas that add value.
Yeah.
And if you kind of unpack that quickly, new ideas, lots of times people, when they talk about innovation, or think about innovation, they may immediately jump to disruptive innovation or innovation that's completely new to the world. And that's understandable. But we take a very expansive, broad definition of innovation that includes that, but also other types of innovation. And I think one of the misconceptions about innovation is that it has to be something new to the world. And that does happen, but it's very, very rare. Most innovation is new to a space, new to a country, new to an industry, where the real innovation is how do you apply that to make it real and relevant to the context of whatever problem that you're trying to solve. And then adding value. We live in a world not with a shortage of ideas, like I said, but how do you really go from whiteboard to reality? How do you take these great ideas and actually get people to want to absorb them, and really make an impact beyond a few people or a few companies, but literally at scale? And, as I've gotten to know Bounce and you look at the ABCs, I'm a parent. I love all of my children, but the bridger, is really, in my view, the unsung hero of innovation. Bridgers really focus on building partnerships in those places where innovation often dies, sometimes called the Death Valley of innovation. So they're kind of the unsung heroes. They don't always get the spotlight, but they play a very, very important role. And with Bounce, I see the parents really as the bridgers in financial literacy. The whole thesis of Bridgers, and we're so proud, our article, which is a teaser for the book, was on the cover of the recent HBR magazine. And it's really a love letter to this role of being a bridger, and how do you ensure that where innovation often stalls and kind of the boundaries and the seams of organizations and ecosystems, that it doesn't, and it continues to build momentum and grow. And the whole thesis is that innovation really fails to scale when there's no one translating
Right.
between the vision, the mission, and the people who need to execute. So Bounce, 10, it became very clear to me early on that the parents are essentially these bridgers, right? Sitting between the financial knowledge that exists in the world, your 30 plus years of experience that you have, Joline, and then the kids who need to internalize it and figure out, okay, well, what do I do with this, and take action on it. So one of the things that I love about Bounce is the F.I.S.H framework. F.I.S.H is an acronym. I'm not sure all of your listeners know. I'm sure many do. Financial, intellectual, social, and human framework. Of course, financial is a part of it. But in my words, I see that as a bridging methodology. Giving parents really the structure to translate these complex financial life concepts into something an 6-year-old can start to absorb and act on. And it's like, without that bridging role that parents play, financial literacy stays very abstract and it doesn't scale into something that's behavioral change. And if there's anything that I've learned trying to innovate around the world, we've got many challenges in humanity, Jolie, but the greatest challenge is changing human behavior. So a lot there, but you got me excited about coming on your podcast.
Well, this explains why I'm excited too, because I'm learning again, even as I'm listening to you. And you and I have talked a lot, but I love how you are turning families or parents into innovators and naming the role that they're playing, as well as Bounce and the work you and I do. It's interesting. I think of, I use the word expansive, which is one of my favorite words. And expansive in what we're doing is to expand the very notion of wealth so that families have really a bigger language or a bigger canvas to talk about what money, what wealth means in the context of their family with their children. And we know how curious and precocious and sometimes downright nosy kids can be when they're asking their parents about, well, how much money do you make? Or how much is the house worth? And things like that. But I think what you have done for me in your introduction is show how many different uh, places, roles, opportunities there are for innovation in the context of family. And that all by itself is an innovation because we don't talk about innovation in the family as routinely as we talk about innovation at work, innovation in your companies, innovation in technology. You really bring that out in a way that just makes me dazzled. I love it. So this is a great way. I wonder if you can tell a story that brings this home for listeners who think, yeah, that sounds great, you two, but exactly what do you mean? Is there any way you can make this a little more concrete for anybody listening?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you made me really light up when you said a lot of that. There is something really interesting. I mean, you just take kind of economics 101 in abundance versus scarcity. Yeah, there's really an abundance of people talking about and have been for years in organizations, private sector, public sector, innovation. But then, when we enter the world of family and the dinner table conversations, it's very scarce. I mean, I pride myself of being an innovator and being in the innovation space for a couple of decades, but I'm not sure that I've ever thought about, hey, I need to innovate, but I should. And I'm glad that you prompted and nudged me, to start to think about, how do we innovate in the way that we work together as a family? And that sounds maybe a little new agey and abstract as you said. But if you think about it more practically, many of the listeners, I'm sure you've been a part of companies and organizations, you've been managers or leaders or worked for leaders. And, the world is changing. It was changing before COVID. COVID accelerated it. I think the arrival of AI has accelerated the change and the urgency of change even more. So because of that, I think that external need, right, there's almost an expectation in every organization, hey, we need to change. We need to evolve because of that. But I don't feel like that's necessarily translated into the world of families and financial parenting and literacy. And it should. And obviously you and Bounce 10 are carrying that flag. So you're right. I worked for some of the most admired, famous tech companies in the world, IBM, Microsoft, Salesforce. And one of the things that I learned representing these tech companies is that change can be instigated, can be sparked by technology. But if you really want to innovate and scale innovation, it requires holistic thinking. And even in this day and age of AI, many organizations filled with smart people, I say it this way, are trying to tech their way to the future, buying technology and hoping, very crudely that, oh, by using ChatGPT, we're now innovating.
Right.
But the reality is the key reasons great innovations really fail to scale in any context is the leaders are focusing too narrowly on the product or the tech, and they ignore the human, cultural, and social systems around or that are around that. So I think the core insight around Bounce 10 is exactly that. You can't scale financial literacy by just teaching kids about compound interest. If you want to develop the whole self, you need to have a whole ecosystem, financial, intellectual, social, and human development together. So I think it's, again, the bridgers, but being, a whole parent, a true innovator, you're thinking holistically and you take that holistic approach. And I think that's what great bridgers do inside of these organizations, obviously what Bounce 10 is doing for families. So when we got our Bounce 10 pack here at the home, I was really excited for many reasons to open it up and see the reaction of my son. And we've been on a journey for the last month on Money Score. For the listeners, if you don't know what Money Score is, it's a 10-step kind of process to kind of understand, age appropriate, how I, as a parent, can be more confident about having conversations where I'm meeting my 9-year-old son and taking many of these things from the adult world that can be pretty complex and getting him to start to understand it and want to engage around it. And there's so much around that we've learned together. And one thing that I love about, and I've got my binder right here from Money Score
Right. Oh, thank you.
with my handy dandy pencil. And I think the one thing is, connecting innovation to like making it practical. Um, what I love about when you talk about innovation, most people like they light up. It's an exciting topic, talking about the future and something new or different than whatever it is today. But there's this analogy between innovation and mountain climbing, right? And a lot of people think that innovation is about coming up with the idea, right? A lot like mountain climbing is getting to the peak of Mount Everest.
Right.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I learned that there are more fatalities in mountain climbing going down the mountain than going up the mountain,
Wow.
right? Like innovation. There are more fatalities going down than up because most people think that innovation is about coming up with the idea. The idea is great, but it's nothing unless you actually execute on it. And because we relax, we think a lot of the job is done. I've had the conversation with my son. He's starting to understand that these things are important. I want to believe, probably in my own bias, that he's thinking about this when he's laying in bed at night. But what I love about my binder is it helps us be very prescriptive.
Yeah.
It's at the right level, but it enables us in the relationship between me and my son to figure out what do we do and where he is and what he wants to learn, which is obviously going to be very different than other kids and where they are. So one of the great things was when we were in the first one, it was a question about whether my son had ever been in the bank branch and his feelings about that. And he looked at me and he was really motivated. I could feel a little bit of the irritation coming through that 9-year-old of, yeah, why have you never taken me to a bank branch? I was like, well, you have. You were very young. You may not remember it, but let's make sure we go check out one here soon. So I think it makes things actionable. We live in a world where there's lots of shortage of information and financial literacy content, apps, books, curricula. The innovation exists, but it's like, how do you make it something that's impactful and a real outcome? And I've seen that by doing it.
Well, and it's so interesting when you spoke of, people think technology is innovation. And, God knows we have a lot of technology here at Bounce. But for us, a lot of the innovation is understanding that it is the analog connection between parent and child that really is the innovation we're trying to get to. It is finding a way to get parents in between their kids and that screen or those digital devices that are really lowering parental voice or diminishing parental voice and giving them a more direct connection. I mean, there's a kind of bridging function too. I'm wondering if in your role as a parent, you think there is an addition to the bridging as you're using that ABC model that you talk about in your new book. Do parents play the mother, father, one parent, second parent? Are there multiple roles in those ABCs that you play in the family, do you think?
I think absolutely. I think that's a great point. So again, the ABCs architect is really about building community and culture, an environment where people are comfortable to participate.
You know what? I'm going to interrupt to say we talk about that in the world of family often as governance. Governance is a very, I don't know, off putting word in many ways. And I think the architect, in terms of building community and family, is much more encompassing or certainly inviting. That's a good one for me to keep in mind. So the architect and back to the bridger.
The architect, and I think another way of thinking about it, culture is, I think there's culture in so many different places. I think culture is used in business, but in family and parenting, I think we talk about values and identity. But there's, I think, a lot of similarities. And there's this great quote from many years ago from the business world that, culture is what happens when the CEO leaves the room,
Mm.
right? When no one's watching. And you think no one's watching or you don't get in trouble, right? The real behaviors come out. And I think that there's a very interesting parallel, to parenting, and especially financial education and developing hopefully holistic kids, right? When the parents aren't in the room, right, the culture, starts to show up. So I think, around that, it's again, scaling, we found it's a leadership problem. It's not necessarily an information, challenge. And so I see Bounce 10 really attacking that gap, right? And you're really trying to create a category that, of course, includes financial education, but ultimately it's about holistic parenting. And I think equipping, the leaders, in this case, the parents, to have more confidence around the kids that they want to develop. In our everyday life on the soccer field or friends and family, there isn't a parent that I've ever come across that says, I don't really care about my kid succeeding and I don't want my kid to be a good person when they grow up. No one ever, says that's not their intention, but life gets busy. And I think sometimes we get overly confident too, as successful people in our careers, that just because we're, good at one thing that we're confident we can make it up. And I think it's good to be vulnerable. And I think the one thing about innovation is recognizing that we all have our relative strengths and, and to find people who are better and have the wisdom for decades and to help us, but not necessarily do it directly, help us in our own voice, be comfortable in the way that we marry that wisdom with the identity and values of what's important to us in the family culture that we're trying to create.
Wow. You remind me too that I think of family as shelter, of course, in a very primal kind of way. But I also have always seen family as a launch pad and balancing those two impulses between providing shelter and comfort in the family. You and I have talked about this before on the one hand, but also making it a place where kids can learn to be resilient and to launch from, out of, if you will, means that we really do need to think about what's the culture of the family, how are we leading in the family, what are the values, what are our messages, and in many ways that is a very analog kind of intimate experience between families or parents and children. Um, for me, it makes the work of family so exciting that it's at least as exciting at what goes on in a Fortune 100 during the day. Because you are, particularly today, I'm going to get on a rant here for a moment, but literally today's children who are being born can plausibly imagine they will walk on Mars. I mean, that's a wacko notion. But if we aren't thinking about how do we launch children, how do we help them grow with their greatest humanity, I do think it's just not enough to talk about what does it mean to manage wealth. It's what does it mean to manage your humanity in the context of family. And that is what we're trying to do. It's so much fun to think about this as a kind of new activity for families or a license for parents, if you will, to learn their own new skills and take off in the family in a new way. This is a conversation that we didn't have even a decade ago. It's a new conversation. I do think your book, if it's up to me, the new book is really going to, I think, leap away from just the world of corporations and really find its way into the world of families, because I think we're going to discover there's so much more to be taken from Genius at Scale. Wait, do I have the title right?
You do. Yes, you absolutely do. Thank you for that. I know it was a whirlwind of emotions when it arrived after so much years of work and the culmination of so many people supporting me from my mom, my wife, my kids. It's really amazing. But thank you. You reminded me of so many different things. I think first, my old boss at IBM had a great expression. She said, "Comfort and change don't coexist." And I remember she said that around the 100th anniversary of IBM, a tech company celebrating, a 100 years is remarkable. And part of it is that spirit and philosophy. And I do really believe that. I'm a big believer in momentum. And the reverse of momentum is stagnancy and complacency. And second you get complacent, right? It's you're entering a world, I think, of a lot of risk. And so yeah, a lot of these things are uncomfortable, but I would tell parents that if you have those feelings, then you're exactly in the right place. That's where you should be. It's what should be happening. And yeah, it is. Even for me, someone who spent my entire career in tech, how fast the technology is accelerating. I think the other thing that I saw is that the average life expectancy of a child that's born in 2025 in the United States will be 105 to 107 years old based on predictions. So, yeah, I mean, as parents, um, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the business.
Yeah.
I didn't want to write a book just to write a book. I personally wanted to write a book because I wanted to give hope to people, to inspire people. We live in a world where even one of my sons, and I love him, admires one of the billionaire tech bros, um, who is not shy about talking and bragging about the top-down culture that they create and how their leadership authority is used for authoritarianism to get what they want done. And we wrote this book for many reasons, but we want it to be a love letter to a different style of leadership, leadership style, of course, about impact, but where leadership authority is being used to empower others and enable others to experiment, because that's really the sort of innovation that makes an impact on how we live and work. And the innovation that is a part of what we want to be in terms of society and community. And so when I think of like Bounce 10, the advice that I give to your community is, and I think what you're really doing is you're developing the future problem solvers of the world.
Exactly.
Right here in 2026, the arrival of AI, and I read something, I may get the number slightly wrong, but it'll be in the ballpark as I'm preparing my senior in high school for college. It's something like recently 30% of college graduates are finding employment in their field of study, or less. I was actually surprised it was that high, right? So, having come from Microsoft and IBM, I get friends, family, colleagues all the time asking me for advice. Like, okay, hey, AI going to take our jobs? What are the jobs of the future? If I had a crystal ball, believe me, I would share it. But what I do believe, where I'm talking to CEOs or local schools, get great at problem solving. We may not see what the problems of the future are, but the world has always had problems, and it will continue to. And the world around us was invented by people just like us,
Right.
actually no smarter than us with less resources. So it's actually a pretty exciting moment to be alive if you have the right mindset. And yeah, we're going to enter a period of pretty significant disruption and transition, but get good at problem solving. And there are a bunch of different ways you can do that. Design thinking certificates, maker labs. I think the one just started up. You were telling me, Joline.
Very exciting. In my backyard, we have a makerspace that came out of just the passion of a group of educators and parents saying we've got to help our kids prepare for the future. And it's not just one or the other. It's not just can we make something, can we get a college education? It is increasingly both. We need to use our entire being to learn. And I think that's what you're talking about. You also remind me, you and I are going back and forth on quotes today, and I'm reminded of Eric Hoffer, who one of my heroes, because he says, the learners will inherit the future. The learned will be prepared for a world that no longer exists. And when I think about what families and certainly parents are doing is they are empowering their children to learn and to try and to fail sometimes and come back and try things again. And fundamentally, this connection between economics and innovation, if you will, has to tap into our humanity. It has to tap into our whole being. So I do feel as though we're helping families build a bigger canvas to work on. It's not just these discipline things that you teach your kids to do, in addition to teaching them to tie their shoes and to figure out how to get from A to B between school and home. We're trying to teach them how to think, to solve problems, as you put it. And it's a very exciting time in some ways, I think, even though it's a very challenging time for families to try to navigate all the things I have to do. My heart goes out to every family right now. But what you're describing are new tools that we have, both in the tools you're describing in the new book and in what we're doing at Bounce. And have to say, it's not a surprise you and I finally met and are working together. It just seems to be kismet. So we have to continue this conversation, I think. Um, I can see that RJ Malik has just appeared. That's always a sign that I'm going way too long in my conversation. But this was a good conversation, RJ, and I didn't want to cut it off at all.
I was going to tell you afterwards, but I'll tell you now. You should have Jason back. It's a fascinating conversation between you two. I was sitting back here behind the scenes, and it was very enjoyable to listen. And there's a lot to discuss because things are changing rapidly, as you both have been talking about, and things will continue to change rapidly. So this conversation will be continuing.
Will be continued, indeed.
Yeah, Jolene, I just wanted to pick up on one of the things you were just saying. As parents, we hear the word all the time, resilience. Resilient kid, build resilience. I think Scott Galloway talks about it. And I think, some of his thinking, I think it resonates a lot with me as well. But I always found as a parent, it's like, okay, yes, makes sense. But what do I do with that information?
Right.
How do I take action? And I agree with you. It was destiny. It took a little longer than I probably would have wanted to. But better than late than never that we finally did intersect, because I really think that's what Bounce 10 does, is develops resilient kids who are learners. So congratulations. And it's a privilege and honor to be a small part of what you're doing.
Well, and I encourage everybody listening to go and read Genius at Scale, because who would have guessed that it's actually a parenting book? Now, your co-author and your publisher may not appreciate me saying that, but I've been feeling that for a while. So anyway, it's a very exciting moment. And I'm going to echo RJ. I do think we should continue this conversation and do another podcast in the not so distant future. So thank you so much for your time today.
Jason, before you go, do you mind sharing contact information?
Of course. What would you like? Email? Phone?
The easiest way to get a hold of you. I think email probably would be best.
It's Jason, JASON.R, as in resilient, .wild, WILD, no E at the end, at gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you. Fascinating conversation to eavesdrop on. And we're looking forward to your next podcast, Joline. And thank you for listening to today's Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with friends and family. If possible, rate this podcast and leave a review because this actually helps others find the show. Until our next podcast, for Joline Godfrey, I'm RJ Malik.